Welcome to the Femme Futurist Society, a series of interviews. I'm so excited to have you, Cecily Sommers, as part of what we are doing. And just quickly, the genesis of this exactly was to try and balance out the conversation more. Because I feel like everything that I do and so much of the work that I do, as I've moved more and more into the future and more into a technologically defined future, has become more and more masculine. You know, the careers I grew up in actually were more balanced, and I feel like it's become more and more narrow. And I think there's such a richness in the conversation and in the work that we do that there's something powerful about amplifying those perspectives. And so we'll learn as we go through the various conversations. Each of us has our own unique work and our own unique point of view on it, and we're creating certainly our own unique stamp on the planet and trying to impact it in different ways. But there's just something about the sensibility that I find really refreshing, and I'm really enjoying getting to spend time with. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and thank you for spearheading this kind of conversation and community where new voices and more feminine voices are included. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's fun. And again, what I am learning through, part of this was to share with others, but I have to say very selfishly, I have been learning a ton from it, both around the work and about how we present in the work and how we got to the work. So we could start with that for a moment. I always think people are curious to understand, you describe yourself as a business futurist. And we shared yesterday, we both have a very deep strategic background, like our orientation is very strategic. But do you want to give a quick overview about how you got to what you're doing or how you describe your work now?
Yes, because they're related. I am a business futurist, and I've been doing that for the last 20 years of my life, but it's certainly not what I set out to do when I was young. In fact, my first career was in dance. Speaking of young, I began training at 5. And that career as an artist, which took me to dance with the Omaha Ballet, Illinois Dance Theater, and a modern dance company in Chicago, which is my hometown, was a wonderful training for life in many ways. However, the dream that I had wished to become a professional dancer came true. And in its coming true, I recognized that I still was interested in having an even fuller life. And so the bridge to that fuller life for me came through the sciences as a next step and next career. I went on to become a chiropractor. And little did I know that when you become a chiropractor, you also become a business person. And little did I know about myself at that time that it was something that, again, with my background as an artist, I found to be the most expressive platform that we can have in life, practically, that you are manifesting yourself in the world according to a vision and a purpose. And business was fun for me. I was good at it. I created a beautiful clinic, bought another one, and eventually sold them.
And just to back up, because I will encourage people to watch your TEDx Berkeley talk where you take more detail about this journey. But one of the things I thought was beautiful when you described this practice is you also had an art gallery next door.
Yeah.
It just was like, the picturing that just seemed extraordinary.
Yeah, that particular part of my life, which is definitely alive and informs the work I do now, is that arts and science, which, I grew up in very much of a humanities and art family. I didn't have much of a relationship to science. So the beautiful discovery about science for me was that it asks a lot of the same questions the arts do. And, a lot of deep whys and wherefores, and also taking a look at how we make sense of our world. So I was drawn to that. I also, in parallel to that, was teaching anatomy and clinical sciences for about 12 years. And so my success in business lent itself into a demand for tell us how you do that. And so seminars and consulting in healthcare is where I launched my consulting business with a focus on healthcare initially. or I should say that the clients were in healthcare, but my focus was on brand strategy. And for me, the native parts of arts and science were, the artist training in me of really knowing who you are and how to bring it and make it objective for others to see and resonate with was exactly what I had been trained to do for most of my life. And that there was a different way in than most business processes. And the strategy part was what I also had great skill in, of seeing things in systems, being able to diagnose and come up with an appropriate and custom treatment path for each group. And so business felt like
to the chiropractor, because I've been a patient or a consumer of chiropractic medicine for 30 years, and it's so much more holistic, right? So there's a way in which you are solving for people, but you have such an array of modalities with which it is that you are tuning in, as opposed to, I think, allopathic. I feel like it's more interventionist and takes a very specific route. The reason I say that is I once did a consulting thing for a big, huge, like one of the biggest brands in the world. And we were in this conference room talking about process, and I kept trying to explain it. And finally I was like, it's holistic medicine versus allopathic medicine. Like, it was just trying to create a metaphor for how we think differently. And so I think that your background as a chiropractic practitioner, I would assume, informed it slightly differently than if you'd been a surgeon.
Well, it did inform exactly the choice that I made, which was I had already been teaching anatomy as a graduate teaching assistant at University of Illinois when I was still a dancer, in fact. And I might have gone to med school because I was training pre-med students, but my choice was to become a chiropractor because you still are a general practitioner by law, doctor of chiropractic, which also meant that I could include what I did include, which was Chinese medicine, homeopathy, and other systems. Frankly, that's the systems thinker in me, and my training is that each one is a system of logic unto itself. None have all the answers, but all reflect a certain truth that you want to pay attention to when you're trying to confront the mystery of what is health and what is disease and how do we account for it in this person and their direct needs. So it was the combination of really a diagnostic lens that was inclusive of, I call them several logics, because they all see the world in a particular way, ask and answer the same questions with different outcomes. And all of them are complete. They're smart. And none of them are completely right.
I think that, and
would have a different world. So that's very much, I think, the particular ways in which my work as in strategic foresight is informed, in that I do that naturally, I do it well, and I have had specific training in that, just as I have had specific training in the creative process and in collaboration. So I bring both of those things into my work in foresight.
So what I think is so stunning, again, as I'm learning more about you and your work, is our paths could not have been more different, like 180 degrees different. I'm much more intuitive. I'm so much less process. I have none of the discipline that you had as a dancer or as a student of the sciences the way that you have. My path has been completely different. And yet we've ended up in very similar territory with very similar lenses, very similar insights into things, which I find so remarkable and so beautiful. Like, I think it's just really fun to discover other people who have, again, just found this way of thinking and approaching things and consulting from just such different paths.
Well, my understanding at this point in my life is that when you dig deep, the point is to dig for something that feels true. And when you hit truth, it usually, it's not unique to you, it's alive in you. And it's alive in many other expressions. So I do think the deeper we dig, the more common roots we find. And that, my drive is always to find the roots of things. It's where we get our deepest understanding. So it doesn't surprise me that, living lives of inquiry and investigation, that we might be digging and finding a similar root system again, differently expressed, but still the same stuff.
Yeah.
And that's true, I think, for everyone.
Well, I always describe my work and my path, which has been more linear, about getting closer and closer to the point of impact. I was always just curious about what was impacting the thing that I was doing and why it was changing what it is that I was doing. And even if I was satisfied here, somebody else was coming in and making some sort of shift to it, I'm like, why? And I want to understand it, which I do think then leads you to this work where we're looking at the biggest systems of change and trying to figure out how to navigate and help others navigate their way through it. So you wrote a book then called How to Think Like a Futurist. You know, what changes, what doesn't, and what's next. There are ways in which you frame how you think about the future and help other people through it. And I forgot, I meant to actually go back and research it, and I apologize. But the four, is it forces that include?
The four forces, yeah.
Okay.
The four forces of change, and it builds on our conversation thus far very nicely, is that in doing this work of really trying to figure out, it's not about watching the trends in our lives, which is kind of the frothy conversation that lives on the surface about lifestyles, about values, issues, things that are an expression of change. And those roots of change are always followed back to the same four forces that shape human society and always have. And they are predicated on the following: that groups come together, we form society so that we can do, produce, share more together than we could alone. And that at its final, or I would say ultimate definition, is it's an economic project about why we come together. All of many other things flower as a result of it, but that's really why we come together. And we use the four forces to do that. Resources. We take a look at the gifts of nature and what's available to us through land, animals, landscape, minerals, and on. And then we either invent or use tools to extract those resources and shape our lives through shelter and convenience and more labor and production. And we continue to do that ongoingly. The third force is that we have to consider demographics of the group. You know, what's going to keep a group stable over time is who's a part of it and what the balance of gender and labor and skill and talent and elders and novices and all of that in demographics is very important. And then the last force is the one of governance. Is one of human activity. And it's where we begin to say, so if we're coming together, what are the rules by which we manage our cooperation? And this is like the rules of the house for a family, but writ large, larger groups, we are bound by often laws, we're bound by rules of the market, we're also bound by traditions and conventions and social mores that make up the rules of our cooperation and keep us pointed in the same direction. And we may argue about what that looks like or what it should be, but it is the method by which we create our own change and paths ahead, and also reconcile and make sense of the changes coming up through resources like climate change or technology like AI and VR and biogenetics and demographics like all the mobility around the world. And then we see that affecting this last force of governance quite directly and dramatically today. It's very loud in that force field. But these are the things by which society is shaped, forms itself, and as we're going through right now, maybe reforming itself for the future.
Can we talk a little bit about where you see some of the, it's a big question I'm asking, and I'm not sure it can be answered in a sound bite, but there was something that you said in your Global Foresight Summit talk, which I also encourage people to watch, because you go into this work in much more detail than we'll have time to today, but I do think it's deep. But there was a line that I wrote down that talked a lot about, well, partly that we've been drafting on the social orders and the technologies of the past, right? We're entering this new era where I do think there's going to be certainly new things to work with and new things to be called to. So I don't know where this line of inquiry is going that I'm sort of digging at, and if you know what I'm trying to say. But I do think that managing these breakdowns is big.
Well, it is. So, as I've mentioned, governance is kind of where humans start to be a force
Right.
in relation to these kind of steady, um, uh, the first three forces. And what we do, as humans, is we make things up. Everything is this construct. And it's all based on our worldview, our best understanding to date at this time in history about how the world works, what human nature is. Every government, which is an institutional form of governance, is really based in a view of human nature when it's not just a straight up dictatorship and grab for power. What we're noticing then is that and this is maybe a separate piece of our conversation, but as the economic forces which come through technology are shifting what we produce and how we distribute it, which has been happening through the computer age and now beyond, it creates its own friction as well. And we start to look at how things are produced and distributed in new ways. So right now, when a crisis hits, every system has its own fragility. It's not good for all time. It's only good for the time in which it was conceived. And now we have new forces acting upon it. And a crisis reveals where we've been fragile, what those weaknesses are, and where we're going to have to renew our strength, usually from a new place. So we are in this time where what we had as a result primarily of the 20th century no longer holds where we're headed in quite the same way.
Totally agree.
So it's a clearing period, and it's a turbulent period. It's a revolutionary period. There are social movements and technological revolutions and a new way we will have to reorganize ourselves. And it will take some time before we know what the next form of governance, in particular, next form of economic model that's going to work for us. The ideology that has been carried along with the global expansion in the last 30 to 40 to 70 years, really post-World War II, has carried with it that markets are really powerful. They're really powerful at equalizing and democratizing. They lift all boats. They can bring people along. And we've created technology platforms such as Google and Facebook and Amazon and others, which are supposed to, eBay was early on, to bring people in. And what we're recognizing is, yes, and there are costs. And so I would say, the urge and force of entrepreneurship in the last 30 years, really 1990s were the heyday of launching that, have been a part of really believing in markets and believing in the power of the self to do all of this, and to making sure government gets out of the way so we can create our own way.
As you start to look at the future, right, and the work that you're really focused on, I guess that should be the doorway that we use. What is it that you are spending your time and energy doing, and where do you think that, how that serves where it is that we're moving ahead, as you see on the landscape, all that you see?
Oh my goodness. Well, we are being challenged right now, each of us, as individuals, certainly as organizations, as larger groups and societies, our tribes as we form ourselves, to consider how do we make it through. This world is changing with a rapidity and the kind of a violence that's really upsetting. And it is also demonstrating to us, the hype we've been talking about for the last 30 years of, disrupt or die. And it's like, oh, well, I guess that's coming true, isn't it? Almost a little too literally. That this is a time in which we need to make sure that as the environment is changing so with such volatility, our job, it's the mandate of evolution, is to make sure that we stay relevant. And that's a little bit of a different take than trying to manage it. We do have to manage it, but what a crisis reminds us of is that we aren't really in control. And that whatever we thought and the tools we were using, the ideologies we had, or have somehow fallen short to prepare for and really make good of the crisis at hand. So the job, in my view, especially now, is to find ways to keep ourselves centered. The stability is not out there. The stability has to be from ourselves, and that we have the capacities. Humans and the world and nature has been through crisis before. We have everything we need to get through it, but it will take a little bit of focused attention to make sure that we are accelerating our own evolution so that we can serve its mission, which is to stay relevant. So we're not
The
chasing.
focused attention on what then? How would you define what the focused attention should be?
I believe that what we have as a really key determinant, it's not the sole determinant, but a key determinant, is that we have for the first time some really big revolutions in our life brought to us by technology. And among them is artificial intelligence, which is a huge category of technologies, sensors and things, all kinds of big data flows, and the ability for the first time in history for what we call problem solving and intelligence to live outside of our skulls. So we need to understand what wisdom is, how we activate it, how we grow it, what we pay attention to. It's not about having the answers. It's about seeking understanding. I do believe foresight is a beautiful, beautiful way to do that. It takes a meta view of what's changing, where it's coming from, as we spoke earlier, that gets down to the roots. It helps us stabilize by seeing how change occurs, where it comes from, and where it's likely to go. We need to do that for our sense making of where the world is and what's happening and why. And that these clearing periods in history, of which we are a part of, as every generation has, this is ours, is part of, in effect, nature's way. So foresight is definitely a piece of it. But how we set ourselves up for that information and what we choose to do is also kind of the bedrock of wisdom, which is that we stay absolutely humble. We don't know the answers. We just want to investigate the nature of change and our role and our purpose and how we respond to it. We want to apply discernment instead of reactivity. We want to be really thoughtful about moral implications. And by morality, I mean, what choices do we make that support the greatest good for the most? And, diminish and eliminate or minimize suffering. We're going to have different points of view about how we do that. There is no single answer, but we do have to answer it for ourselves. That's what each of us has to do and what each of us has to contribute. And so paying attention there is really quite important. And gives us, when we can rest in those reminders, it gives us the capacity to stare uncertainty in the face and keep moving anyway. And that may be the single most important capacity that's needed in these times. I think we have to really dance with change. We have to be responsive and adapt and agile and flexible and accepting that change carries all potentials, not just the ones we want. That it carries all potentials, and it's always yes. When people ask me, are we at the bridge of extinction and are things going to get, into a total mess? Will we lose everything that we love? Or are we building, is this our opportunity to build kind of a utopian, more harmonic future? And the only thing that I feel is honest, at least for me to say, is the answer is yes. Yes. all potentials will be forwarded. They always have. We carry them with us. We carry them inside them. We carry them in our societies. It is part of nature. It is part of human nature that those things are expressed. And none of us have the answers. However, each of us does have a purpose. And so we navigate these times by holding tight to our purpose and playing loose with tactics. Part of my personal story includes the fact that I am now, happy to say, a 5-year survivor of breast cancer. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, one of the things that I immediately oriented myself toward was that I knew I was going to experience, know, and feel things that I couldn't any other way. And that it was going to be a ride, not one I would have chosen, but one that was going to teach me something. And it surely did. I've never experienced more love and more understanding of how much that's alive in all of our lives. It's just becoming aware of it. And then for me personally, I think a foundational shift from that experience was waking up in the recovery room after my mastectomy and looking under my gown and going, what's there? And immediately what came to me is, I'm already whole. Whatever changes my body is going to go through and whatever challenging recovery I'm going to face, I am already whole. And the rest of it is time. And the rest of it is this journey that I can't predict. And I have to be available to and allow it to change me. That's the journey in every time in which our life goes through some kind of shattering of, everything we've tried to make and hold on to and be proud of, and it doesn't work forever. And when we go through those clearing periods, and we all have done this on a personal level, so we all know what it takes to be here now and to be available for this learning that our current crisis is teeing up for us quite beautifully, is that we have it. We are not going to be wiped off, but we are going to have to hold ourselves. We're going to have to renew ourselves and find the resilience internally to allow all of it to be okay and to be responsive at the same time and be guided by our sense of purpose and commitment. It will shape us. It will take us to a new territory. We don't get to say when, and we don't get to say, exactly what it's going to look like. We do get to say how we want to be inside of that experience.
What's interesting about when you think about this work moving forward and how urge, honestly, to put some of this thinking forward. So I admire that you did, but for me, it's been a bit of a longer journey to try and understand where it is I am. But for me, I do describe so much of what we need to do professionally is to move from thinking that there's a playbook that exists on the planet to developing a set of practices. It's really this a way of thinking really differently. It's not about what we need to go do. It's so much more about how we approach it and how we think about it and how we process it. And so when you use that term in the work that you were doing, I'm like, yes. So
yeah, no, I'm all about the practices. It is, after all of the good, smart, information, now what,
Right. So take us through, what are your practices?
So this effort to cultivate wisdom is kind of the stabilizer in the face of uncertainty. I use 4 practices, 4 ways to wise up, as it were, and to practice whenever we're feeling stuck or dejected, or just as a reminder to keep us honest about our own evolution. And those 4 practices, the first one is optimism, really critical right now. And the practice of optimism is the reminder that I can see and make good of anything, wherever I am. that was the reminder to myself when I got my diagnosis of cancer. I can do this, and I will make good of it. It is a hopeful orientation that also has a sense of faith in oneself and capacity. The second practice that we pull out whenever we're feeling anxiety or uncertainty or stuckness delivered is to apply curiosity. And this can be a very intentional act, is that very often when we are confronted with discomfort in our lives, our posture is to, contract and go away from it, or to go, ew, that's not right, it's wrong, I don't like it, we need to stamp it out. And what we can do is change our orientation instead, to lean into it and go, oh, tell me more. There's something to learn about, because the more we understand something, the more we can make peace with it and find our way through. So it's okay to feel the resistance, acknowledge it, but then choose to go from ew to ooh with curiosity. So our perspective continues to expand.
So I did that, literally that sort of emotional, like ooh versus in a meeting once, and a client asked me to spell the difference. Not like it's not, you said like feel it.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm totally on board with those two.
You're tracking. It's wonderful.
That's exactly where my head is. But you have two other ones that I'm learning to spend more time with. The fourth one I know is the one I've struggled the most with. But I forgot what was the third one.
So, optimism is kind of a mindset that we, again, is a corrective for how are we going to be available to what's coming into our life. Curiosity is how are we going to really, literally learn to expand as new information comes. Courage.
Yeah, courage.
Courage is the third one, which really says that humility anchors me. And in that humility, I know that I have the faith and the ability to keep moving anyway. That this real invitation that when we stare into the face of uncertainty and keep moving anyway, to do small pieces as we go, be a buddy to our fear, and just say this much, and it's okay. I, as a futurist, talk about the future as being a faith-based venture. That what we don't know how it's going to go, but we may know a few things. One is that we have a vision or sense of purpose which is worth pursuing. That's where we start. We also have to invest in the fact of all the people that could do that, I'm the one to do it, or we're the group to do it. This is ours to create. And then the last of it is we have to have faith in the process and the trust that it will show and teach us as we go. And courage can be stoked by that faith, and it also is what will reward that sense of trust and faith. Which leads to the fourth practice, which is that patience is the fourth one.
I know, that word, the P word.
Oh, the P word is the golden ticket. It's the golden ticket. Evolution is an emergent process, and so is learning, and so is the process of expanding ourselves and finding ourselves. We may practice, and we're going to have to practice in the face not of just uncertainty, but our own disappointment and frustration and shame and blame. We have to keep moving anyway and allow that long arc to unfold. It's the long arc of history that gives us the perspective for where we are in this very moment, in fact. That perspective matters. And we have to keep that perspective in our own lives too. If we are sincere and earnest and humble in our efforts, correct our mindset to be optimistic, to apply curiosity when things get tough, to have the courage to keep moving anyway, and then let the path unfold, knowing that you're on it. You're on it. hold tight to your purpose.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because when you say patience that way, then I'm like, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. But when you think about it in sort of the other way, which is that you just wait for things to kind of, that you don't have an agency or a sense of directedness and feeling a desire to. This is, again, I think our backgrounds are different. Our work feels really similar. Our thinking feels really similar. And then the way that we express it is different. And I find that really curious and fascinating and interesting to kind of spend more time with. And I will be an inquiry around that. Because I do think that there is, again, a tension and a balance around the doing as much as you can do and letting it unfold, but feeling that there's still something that you need to do. And impatience is the thing I struggle with most on the whole entire planet. And I've gotten better with and more gracious with over time, and definitely trust. And again, I trust more that dance between dark and light than I think most do. I don't realize all dark is bad, but anyway, you've given me new ways to play with that word.
Yeah, P is not for passive.
Okay, good. That's better. That would work better for me. Okay.
It includes persistence.
Yay. Oh, good. Yes. Yeah. Okay, now I'm back. And passion.
And now you're back.
Passion.
Passion is a little alliteration to help you along.
I do. I do. I need all those other P surrounding cousins to go with it, because then then I can live with it. So awesome. All right, baby. That has been great. Thank you. Appreciate this. We will figure out a way to knit it all together so that the story holds. But so much great stuff in there. And again, this is just, any of these conversations are flyovers of decades of work.
That's right. That's right.
It's done. And so what we're just trying to do is give people enough to kind of, people aren't going to take that 20-year journey with you or with me. And so what can we
snapshot for them?
And leave them to, so that they start their own, and really, hopefully, the sense of inquiry and curiosity and desire to learn with others continues to grow. So
I will take my own learning around the P and patience, because I think other people need to hear that too, that it includes persistence, but not passivity.
Yeah.
So I'll start using that moving forward. So thanks for that provocation.
It's funny. I opened and closed my keynote talks with a deep breath, not quite as graciously as you did in the Global Foresight Summit, but with the same intention. It feels like there's a moment for one right now, which there's a lot to digest and to, I don't know, digest is the right word right now. There's a word, I was reading an essay this morning about composting, and to sort of let fall apart and nourish and create something new. And we're in an extraordinary moment. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences and your insights thus far, right? We are all in a place still of learning and growing and developing individually and collectively. So thank you. And I do encourage people, again, the pieces that I got to watch of your TEDx Berkeley talk, which is more about your journey, your Global Foresight Summit talk, which is more about your work and your thinking currently, and your book, Thinking Like a Futurist. So we'll keep watching the rest of your work and following along. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much.